Today's guest is Troy Leinster, an Australian typeface designer who's worked with one of the most iconic foundries in the world, Hoefler and Company. I'm really excited to welcome Troy and you to the podcast, Able Heads, where we chat with creators who are creating and designing on their own terms. This episode is not about how to make type, but it's about how to make a career in type. This episode is packed with insight on some business lessons that Troy learned going independent and turning your craft into a career. Let's welcome Troy. Hi, Troy. How's it going today?
Well, thanks, Anika. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, yeah. For our listeners, I actually want to dive straight in and ask you something that I'm also personally curious about, which is what does most of the design world get wrong about how type design careers actually work?
Yeah, type design careers are kind of difficult right now. I mean, years ago, it was probably easier to get a job as a typeface designer. Now most typeface designers, I think, are probably self-employed. Freelancers may be doing graphic design as well. The days of getting a job at a foundry, I think, are kind of limited, or if not over, unfortunately, because you can gather a lot of experience and knowledge, obviously, when you have a full-time job making type every day. Sadly, there's not too many big foundries anymore that can afford to hire full-time typeface designers.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. So people like me who are breaking into type or thinking about it as a side hustle, what would be our opportunity to turn that into a business if we wanted to do it today?
I would do it alongside your other way of making money, whatever that is, and do it as a side hustle until it builds up, because type design is a very long-term pursuit. And even myself, after being self-employed for just 3 years out of a foundry, I was in a foundry for 7 years, and then I started my foundry about 3 years ago. It's still very, very slow, and I often say to people, it's kind of like building a library and having to
Hmm.
write all the books to go in the library. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when you've got one book, you might get the odd person coming and taking a look, but until you get a good selection, it's a very slow start.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. So, how would you say your specific skills as a designer helped you work at Heffler and Company and then now Leinster Type?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think as a graphic designer, my drawing skills and things like that came in very handy. Using type in the past was useful. And knowing how to set type and being kind of a typographer, I guess you could say, definitely helps in making type, but it's just the very, very start. So taking those skills into typeface design is very useful, but then there's just such a big amount of learning on top of that to practice. It's mainly just refining the skill and your craft over a long period of time and just slowly getting better and better at it.
Yeah. So, what's your story? Why move from a foundry to making your own and starting a business? What's the story there?
Well, I worked at Heifer & Co for 7 years, and I worked on probably about seven or so typefaces from start to finish. So that was really great experience. And, it's where, before that, I did my master's degree in typeface design. But of course, like everything, when you get a job, definitely had a lot to learn when I hit the ground running. And after 7 years, I felt like I had got to a point where I probably need a different experience to continue to be challenged. Like any job, you can kind of get into a bit of a rut after a while. And it's important then, I think, to kind of look for that next step to push yourself and, gather those extra skills that perhaps you can't gather while you're at the place that you're at.
Right. Yeah, it's not always about also the work that you're doing, but how you're doing it and managing everything else along with it. In the end, I think it comes to how often you enjoy doing that as well, because it is what is helping you grow at the end of the day, too.
Right.
Just knowing your revenue and your projection for the next year kind of grounds you at the end of the day to tell you how you're doing and how much water you're in.
For sure. That other area of the design business is
Mhm.
really important. And obviously, when you work for someone, you don't really have to worry about that. And, as a typeface designer at Hoefler Co, we had someone, for example, that was focused on the engineering part, and then someone focused on the marketing part, and someone focused on building the website. And, you don't, although we were kind of taught to prepare our fonts for sale and things like that, you always had someone to rely on. And when you have someone to rely on, you're not really forced to dig really deep and be in that position where you have to find out how to do something. So that was a real benefit for me when I started my own foundry, because then I was forced to find these things out.
I feel like that is what separates a good foundry from a great foundry as well, which kind of actually brings me to this curious question because I found you through Adobe Fonts and that's what inspired this conversation as well. So I'm curious, how does one get onto a platform like Adobe Fonts? And if you are on other platforms, and what are the offerings?
Yeah, okay. So first, the typefaces will launch on my website, Leinster Type. And then I pitched a couple to Adobe, and thankfully they kind of accepted for them to go on, to that platform. But not all of them are on there because not all of them are suitable for that platform. So it was a matter of me submitting and then seeing whether it was suitable for them or not. So they accepted three at this stage. Hopefully more to come. But it's great being on Adobe because, those fonts are really in front of designers all the time. It's very hard as a foundry to really get in front of a lot of people. It takes, a lot of work, a lot of time. So that was a great kind of opportunity. And I've also got fonts on Sandoll Cloud, which is a foundry in South Korea or a distributor, you might call them, targeting that kind of market. So, at the moment, 3 years in, I'm still in that situation where I'm kind of trying different things, figuring out what suits me, figuring out which fonts are better on which platforms. There's very specific kind of needs for each platform. So it's a big curve, and it's trial and error, and some things work and some things don't.
Yeah, I'm wondering how would you even pitch something to a platform when you're saying, "Hey, this is my typeface and this is what I do." So, how does one even pitch to a platform? What is a typeface pitch for something like Adobe Fonts?
Well, I just prepared a PDF of the typeface and let them know what the character set was like, and showed it how it might be used, and then you just send it off and see what they say.
Send it off and hope for the best. No, I
But
love that.
it's actually quite difficult. It is, I must say, quite difficult to sort of get on there at the moment because I think they just have so many fonts.
Hmm.
And, I think at the moment, perhaps they're looking for something that's a bit more expressive because they have a lot of text fonts and things like that. But who knows? I don't know. I'm in the same boat as everyone else. I just throw my font into the hat and hope that
Yeah.
they might take it. But yeah,
Do you think that AI is playing a role in type design at all, or in your workflow personally?
at the moment, not a lot. Well, that's probably not true. So AI for me at the moment is very useful for helping me to maybe write small scripts. I'm not a coder. I never have. I have no interest in learning how to code. So when I need to solve a problem, I can use ChatGPT or something like that to help me write a script. And in fact, I find it very useful in, educating me how to structure things and do things in a structured way. So that's been super useful. I'm hoping that AI will be useful for speeding up the kerning process. For example, kerning just takes so long and it's such a big investment. If we can get that to be better, take a shorter amount of time, that will be really useful getting our fonts to
Yeah.
market, but also, perhaps making it a little bit more achievable to finish a typeface.
Yeah, I love vibe coding. I feel like You could probably use vibe coding to create something like that, which would be like, hey, let's test it out and see if this coding is good. And I've personally never done it by hand. I've used I know there used to be an extension for Illustrator, which I'm forgetting, I think it's the font self maker. And I used to use that when I first got started, and I just used to use autocode. So yeah,
Right, yeah.
yeah.
Well,
So
is a very interesting thing because, it's a very human thing to it's a
mm,
I'm using all the wrong terms probably, but you really need to use your eyes to space something or kern something, and having a machine kind of doing that or mimicking, that procedure, it it gets you part of the way there, but it doesn't really feel, you know, like it's a really great result.
yeah,
So
yeah.
hopefully, we can get closer, or perhaps there's a tool that we can use to get us part the way there and we can just touch it up at the end.
Mm.
So yeah, fingers
Are
crossed.
there any tools that you've used for the sketching process or just concepting out a typeface?
No, my sketching process is pretty much pen and paper and, just sketching a lot. So I found, I don't sit down to sketch a typeface. I tend to just sit down to sketch a word and then put it on the pile, sketch another word, put it on the pile. Do you know what I mean? Like what really helps is having a huge pile of sketches, because then you can go back to them in 6 months' time and you can judge them without being too personal about it. And you can flick through those sketches and find one that catches your eye. Perhaps it's just a letter, and that can then be the seed for a typeface. It's hard to, I mean, if it was a custom project, well, it would be a different procedure. Perhaps you'd sit down and
Yeah.
have a brief and use that to as a basis for your sketch. But for retail, for me, it's just exploring and not overthinking it, and then just see what happens.
Yeah, that's a very fresh and unique perspective because I feel like when I'm doing design work, sometimes I get too close to it when there are deadlines and there's no way I can see clearly what's wrong with the design. And then 6 months later, I go back to it and I'm like, this is probably not my best work. This illustration does not represent my design skills.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is such a fresh perspective. I've never thought of it that way. I did a 36 days of type challenge where I
Uh,
did like penguin type and used penguins as an inspiration, but also part of it. So used negative space to create the shape of the penguin with vectors and then made that into glyphs. And that project in itself was so hard for me. So I can't even imagine trying to create something that's legible and not just a display type. It's yeah, the process is mind blowing for me. So going back to ChatGPT and just the auto coding part, do you think there's any parts of the design process that are resistant to automation in the future? Is there any other part of the process? Maybe the type creation itself?
well, anything that involves human perception, don't think, it's not until you create something that I think AI can use that to build something else from. So the great thing about humans is we perceive things, and every day we perceive things differently. We might do something yesterday that we would change today. Often, when I make a typeface 5 years later, I'm like, oh my God, I need to, do that again. Or you'll spot something, that's because you're always growing every day. You're influenced by the outside and by what other people do, and your perception changes. And that's what we can hold on to as creatives for our way to kind of move through this new space that we're entering. So anything to do anything with perceiving weight and space, I think it's going to struggle to get that as well as we perhaps could do it fairly quickly. And
Right.
you have to remember that whatever we make, in order to be different to what these machines are going to be making, we have to put ourselves into it. We have to put a bit of our opinion into it, a bit of the way we see things, because how I see something is different to how you see it. So if we can inject that into our work and find any opportunity to use our ability to perceive, then I think that's going to be the difference. I hope.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was definitely a slippery slope with AI and design in general. I feel like there's going to be some changes with licensing and how people view foundries and independent foundries and platforms distributing type for maybe people who are just starting out or small business owners who don't even know what a typeface is and they want to create something custom. Maybe they'll just go to chat gpt in the future and say generate something, and then that makes me scared about the future where there's bad coding and bad fonts on the menu where you go for dinner and you can't do anything about it. So yeah,
The thing we have to remember is that there is already bad fonts with bad kerning and bad spacing. Do you know what I mean? And there is people that don't see that, or they don't mind that
hmm,
that's the case. And there will always be that market um, that will be happy with that because, they're interested in something else. Whereas for us, we care about those things, or for design studios or big companies that really care about these things, they won't risk it. They'll want someone like us to tell them what they need,
yeah,
because we're the ones that kind of have the eye for it. Yeah, but there
right.
will always be that other market. I mean, it's here already, so I'm not worried about that.
What are the things you evaluate and refine in a typeface before taking it to business or before launching it for public?
Typeface design is really about creating a system.
Hmm.
It's about space, it's about proportion. All of those things, you can't really measure them. You have to look at them. So that is what I'm constantly working on a daily basis, is how to craft this system and make everything work together so there's a nice rhythm to it, so that texture is nice and even, that type of thing. They're the things that I'm looking at every day, and it's not something you can look at once and fix. It's something that, like we were talking about before, giving something time so you can see it. Yeah. So you'll fix some things, the big things. And then when you come back, there'll be more things to fix that you didn't see in the first time, because the first time you looked at it, you've solved the big things. So it's like layered, and
Yeah.
you can keep going back. You'll always find something else to tweak. So the more passes you can do on the project, the better, the more refined it will be. And hopefully that means a better product at the end of the day.
So what makes you stop at the end of the day? Because you can go on refining it forever and it can take years to develop something that you're happy with.
Right.
But where do you find that stopping point for
I think
yourself?
the stopping point comes where you've fixed what you can see. Again, like I said before, a couple of years later, or maybe 2 months later, you might pick something else, find something else, but it'll be small. So I think you just have to polish it as much as you can see the issues, and then once there's very little issues that you can see to solve, I think it's good to go.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think I should go back to my type design days. But going back to our Adobe fonts and getting into platforms like that conversation. So we talked about how people or platforms are looking for specific kind of typefaces at one point in time.
Mhm.
How do you personally manage that demand with respect to what your brand values are and what the foundry style is? Do you incorporate that in your style or how does that process work out?
I mean, it's in the back of my head, but it's not the driver, because it takes so long to make a typeface. I do not want to be doing what they
Mm,
want me to do, because I'm not going to enjoy it. So it's most important for me to be making something that I feel is a new challenge to me, a new puzzle to figure out, something exciting to keep me going through all those months of making it. And then, if someone else wants it, great. If they don't, well, I've enjoyed the process. And funny thing about typeface design is, at the beginning, I used to live for the end. It would be that release date. But what you find out after the first release, it's a bit of a downer. It comes
yeah.
and goes in 24 hours, and the excitement is done. Whereas the process of, you know, how many months it takes, after a while, you realize that that is the fun bit. The release day can be rather underwhelming, uh,
Mm,
and it's done. And then what do? You gotta come up with another one.
yeah,
So it's
the process goes on.
yeah, exactly. So I think the enjoyment definitely is the process
Hmm.
and the building, and but it can be frustrating, and there can be moments of doubt and moments where you don't know what to do, or you get a little overwhelmed, or you get despondent and feel, is this really going anywhere?
Yeah.
You just have to work through it and realize that, some days you feel good about it, some days you don't.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's also about embracing that part of the process because it's kind of helping you not look at it personally. And then I know you're talking about if you ever pursue the trends, if I may. And now I'm curious, how do you make your typeface timeless when we're not looking at things that are current or trendy right now, and we just want to use this font every day?
No, I try to design something that feels fresh to me, something that I haven't done before. I don't tend to like to make a typeface again, because the process is boring. You've been there. So every project I'm looking for something fresh to me, something I haven't done before, and then trying to put my thoughts on it, how it should be, what the leg of the cap R should look like, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? You've got to put yourself into it for it to be different. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not really thinking about whether it's trendy or not. I do like to design typefaces that aren't too, um, I don't know. I don't know what the word is, but I guess I like classical shapes and solid forms, and these types of things that tend to last longer. But who knows? I mean, I'm only 3 years in, so maybe it'll go out of fashion what I'm doing.
No, I don't think it's one of those things that'll stay forever. Everyone's gonna read. So
Right.
yeah, even AI might need help. So with the creative side of things where you're in the deep end of the process, how do you balance the licensing and the value proposition or the pricing of the typeface?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that I'm still sort of trialing and learning as I go along. So for me, it's really based on the size of the family and how many masters I'm drawing from scratch, and then perhaps how many interpolations I can get in between for less amount of work, perhaps. So the larger families, I tend to price individual styles a little bit less than the smaller families that um perhaps don't have a huge range of styles. But also, I like to track how long these things take. Coming from a graphic design background where you're always tracking time, I don't really track time to the hour, but I like to kind of go, okay, well, that took me 6 months. If I had a job, how much would I get paid for that? And I'm hoping one day I get at least that back.
Mm,
Your accountant would probably say you would want 3 times that back. I don't know, but who knows if that's ever going to happen. But I like to kind of track that sort of stuff just so I know what I'm investing
mm,
to do this. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So how do you kind of, this is in line with what I talked about earlier, but how do you kind of make it a recurring revenue other than promoting it on different distributors? Have you found that your personal Foundry website has helped you with that process?
At the moment, I think the Foundry website is growing slowly and steadily, but I wouldn't say, a huge success yet. It's a slow game. And I guess for me, it's about creating little income streams all over the place. Like to me, one typeface is an income stream, but there's also other income streams that we have to kind of make a whole. So, on the other side of the foundry, I have Type Masters, which is type design coaching. So, people that are making a typeface that want support through that process, I can help out with that. So that's another little income stream. So for me, it was about having different ways to make money. So when um, when I finished my job, I, you know, could survive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I feel like as a small business owner, everyone needs to have. So, do you think that your work with type masters and coaching design students or designers even get into type influences your design decisions as well?
I think any form of collaboration is really great. It helps you articulate when you're helping someone else, it helps you articulate for yourself or ask yourself these questions that perhaps you haven't thought of before. So any form of teaching or coaching, I think, is super valuable. It's an opportunity to, work with people and talk with people, which in type design, we're all, very solo workers. So that for me was an important part of the process, to have conversation and talk with people and not just be locked up making a font all by myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that coaching can provide me as an individual designer, I think.
Yeah, it's part of the process. I feel like if I would get overwhelmed creating something for 6 months and just at one point, I feel like it almost takes away from the process, I would go back to those conversations and learn from those and how they can help me. So it's almost like that mentor and mentee relationship where it's always a two-way relationship. You always learn from each other and collaborate. That's really I admire that a lot. On the same note, I'm curious, how do you approach marketing without kind of feeling salesy when you're selling a typeface? Because it's
Yeah.
one of those niche industries and not a lot of people do it.
Yeah, I know it's a tough thing because when you release a typeface, you want to kind of tell people about it, but you don't want to constantly bash them over the head with this thing. So, I've felt a little uncomfortable before about, releasing a typeface and then perhaps posting every couple of days more about it. But I don't know. I think in the first week or something, post away and then slowly get back to building more typefaces and, just meeting people, getting to know people, building relationships. So when they're ready to purchase a typeface, or maybe they need help with the typeface, or maybe they need advice on what typeface to choose, they think of you, and that's all you can do. It's kind of like, when you're looking for a hairdresser to cut your hair or a barber, you're not really looking until you need it, and then,
Yeah.
then you're looking for one. So I think it's the same sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, you got to be there when someone's ready to buy.
Do you have a letter form that you test or favorite word that you write or sketch every time you create a new typeface?
Every sketch I do, I like to choose a new word. And the word I like to have 5 letters or more, because anything less than 5, it doesn't really look like a word, you know? And I want it to look like a nice looking word. Otherwise, it affects how the sketch looks. So it's important for me to have a capital letter, and a sender and a descender in the word, and hopefully, about 6 or 7 characters long. At that point, you start to see a font. If you're just doing ONO, or HONO or something, that's not a typeface, that's
Yeah,
an O. So there's no personality in those characters generally.
that's the traditional.
Yeah.
That's how people say that these are the first two letter forms that people create when creating a type. And I never understood that because
All over.
they seem very easy to make. And the ones that I struggle with are S's and the M's and the W's. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how this works.
Yeah.
So let's create those first.
Well, the N and the O and those shapes are created first once you have an idea, because you want to set up your spacing and some control characters that you can, when you add a new character and you can relate it to. And those characters are very simple. They have a lot of information in them with regards to stem weight and vertical weight, horizontal weight, that you can use for your other more complicated characters, so that's why we start with them, but there is confusion that we sit there and sketch N's and O's, and that's not the case. You should be sketching interesting words and a new word every time you create a sketch. And then when you start digitizing, I would then start with an N, O, and P, because they're just the control characters that will help us set up this design space, and then we can add in the more complicated characters after that.
So, what would you say is your one source of inspiration that has influenced your type design over the years?
I like to get inspiration from different artists from the street. I love walking around taking photos of old signs or graffiti or any kind of hand marks on the street are very exciting for me. Generally, not because you're going to see a typeface in them, but perhaps they offer up a new shape or a new construction for a letter form that you haven't really thought about. That's always exciting. Fashion, furniture design, those types of things are really interesting to me. I don't tend to look through specimen books constantly. I may refer to them for, a historical kind of perspective, but I'm not really digging through there trying to find something to recreate or,
Mhm.
generally, I want outside input so I can kind of find something new to play with.
Yeah. So, is there like a historical typeface or a type designer that your work is maybe inspired from, or just you generally admire?
Well, because I studied at a Dutch school, I guess, one of the first type designers that I kind of admired was Bram de Doos. Um, but I wouldn't say that his work is something that I refer to regularly, but it was definitely something that opened my eyes to typeface design, and I was very impressed by that work. Yeah, I mean, all of those type design gods have influenced us in one way or another, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also curious, what advice would you give to designers who are trying to make the shift to a type designer in now an AI driven world?
Yeah, I would make stuff, constantly make, because through making, you're going to hone your skills, you're going to get faster, you're going to figure out how to make your process better. If it's all in your head, it doesn't exist. You've got to get it down. You've got to start using those muscles every day, drawing a letter every day if that's all you can manage. Just working on a project and trialing things out, I think, is probably the advice that I would give if you're trying to, get into that area more.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Troy, for being here. And there will be stuff in the show notes for our listeners. So if you're listening at home and want to learn type design or have someone to collaborate with while you're creating type at home, all the other details will be in the show notes. Thank you, Troy, again for joining us, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you so much.
If this episode got you thinking about building a career in type or taking your work from side project to business, I hope Troy's story gave you the permission to start. You can find more of his work at leinstertype.com or follow him on Instagram for the latest. And if you like this episode, share it with a designer who's been thinking with type. New episodes of Ableheads drop regularly, so follow wherever you're listening, and I'll see you on the next one.